Hi, I'm Geoff Thompson and welcome to this video, this vlog as some people call them. I look at lots of vlogs on the internet and I really enjoy what people are offering in the world of photography out there these days, and video. So a little bit about why I'm doing this. I'm retired now from the workforce, and I worked for many years, retired about 6 years ago, worked for many years in government jobs in South Australia, but at the same time as I was doing all that, I also was developing an interest in photography and started actually shooting weddings way back in 1975. So that dates me a little bit. You can see from the grey hair that I'm a bit dated. However, I still like to think I'm up to date with what's going on in the photography world by practicing photography each day using my digital cameras and sometimes my film cameras, and I like to think that I could offer a little bit out there to people just from the basis of pure experience. I only ever went full-time between jobs at one stage in wedding photography for a period of about 6 months. And in that time I was very busy. I was shooting lots of weddings, but I wasn't really making a lot of money. I was doing some weddings for a studio and some for myself, wasn't charging a lot and wasn't getting paid a lot. So I decided that really I would stay as a part-time wedding photographer, having started off with ideas like everyone has of living their dream and of going full-time. And I guess this program I'm about to present in stages is really aimed more probably at the person who wants to maintain their day job and still be what some people call a weekend warrior. Just because you're a weekend warrior doesn't mean to say you have high standards of photography and that you want to give your customer the best possible product. I found that many years ago I was actually competing with some of the big studios in Adelaide and winning over them, possibly partly on price, but people did like what I was doing. Although I must admit, when I first started off I was pretty raw. I didn't know too much about what I was doing, and when I think back on some of the results I got, they probably were just pretty bad compared to today's standards and the standard I have for myself these days. Anyway, between jobs, when I was doing my weddings full-time for that 6 months period, this is back several years ago now, probably about 20 years ago now in fact, I decided, because I had in the workplace given training courses and I had attended a small training course by a photographer in Adelaide on wedding photography, I thought I can do that. I'm going to offer some training as well. So I set up a little wedding photography course, which over the years many people came to do, and some of those people went on to bigger and better things, and some are still working full-time as professional photographers and have won awards for their weddings and other things as well. And I like to think that I gave some of them a little bit of a kickstart, even though obviously they had some pretty good talent. I developed a manual a few years back on my wedding photography course, which the last few times I did it, and I used to do it outside here in our backyard pergola, sometimes inside the house, sometimes I used to do it in the church I attended or other venues where I could go. But what I'm going to basically do is just introduce some of what's in here, some of what I used to teach on my course, and as I said, I'll be doing it in segments and we'll see what comes of it. You may find it interesting. You will also find that as I do this, that I do have a blog. I have a couple of blogs, or about 4 altogether, but I have one main blog where everything is on there, all sorts of things, and another one specifically on photography training, and also another one on my wedding photography to a certain extent. So as I go through this, I will refer back to some of those, and some of the topics I will talk about There are actual examples of photos, pictures that I have taken to illustrate and put on my blog to illustrate some of these subjects. So this is how I used to start off the course, my introduction to wedding photography. When I had people coming along to it, I'd first of all say, well, the aims and objectives of this course. The aim, to introduce keen photographers to the art of photographing weddings and maybe other special events, because I found that once you can photograph a wedding, you can photograph just about any event. And in fact, the only other people who I think who have got probably a little bit better skill in some ways than wedding photographers in that area are people who do editorial shoots every day for newspapers, and they have to think on their feet and be very creative, and I admire those guys, and some of them make great wedding photographers. So the objectives: on the completion of the course, students will know how to plan the photography of a wedding. Planning is very important. I always used to say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. If you aim at nothing, you hit nothing. How to have an understanding of basic posing techniques. Use your camera and flash equipment more creatively. Know what is expected and required to professionally photograph a wedding. Have the confidence after you finish the course to move into wedding photography on a semi-professional, then a full-time professional basis if required. Now the process that I had was through discussion and demonstration. I would show the students what it takes to be a wedding photographer. Albums and video and computer images were used to illustrate the principles and ideas. Now I have a keynote address and I have a blog to take the place of that. A step-by-step analysis of an actual wedding is what I offered to my students. Techniques such as bounce flash, fill flash were demonstrated, and also demonstrated now, of course, the digital side of doing that, which is not much different than the film version, bearing in mind that I started off with a film camera. The majority of the weddings I did when I was shooting film, I started switching over to digital in around about just after the year 2000, but the majority of the weddings I was shooting on a Pentax Super A 35mm film camera. In America they used to call it the Pentax Super Program. And sometimes when I would shoot with medium format cameras, I would use this one, which was the Pentax 645, which the controls are pretty much identical to the Super A. It works the same way, and the same push button settings and all that sort of thing. And I occasionally did weddings with this, or did a combination of two. Beautiful shots when you use medium format. So that's where I started off, but of course I did graduate to digital later on. I also offered comprehensive notes that would complement the training. And I would get down and go through quite a few topics. These are the topics that I hope to cover as I go through this series, if it becomes a series. I just had this idea that I would do this because I watch so much of what other people are doing, and I think, I know that, I learnt that, maybe I can offer a little bit more than what those guys are offering. So, I would start off with your questions and your fears, find out what people were really frightened about in venturing into photographing a wedding. Many professional photographers don't do weddings, they're too scared of them. So I try and find out what fears people had before they started, if they ever were called upon to do a wedding. So I started off very green, called in to photograph my brother's wedding and also my wife's sister-in-law's wedding in 2 consecutive weekends back in 1975, right at the deep end, just using a Pentax Spotmatic, 1 lens, 1 manual flash. I had a tripod, I had a Pentax SP500 as a backup camera, no wide angles, no telephotos, no nothing. That's what I started with. So I had a lot of fears at that time too. The profile of a wedding photographer, just an outline of what it takes to be a wedding photographer. I had a segment called Know Your Enemy, Know Your Weapons, that includes the camera and equipment requirements. planning the wedding shoot, how to do a timetable, some technical things including bounce flash, fill flash, posing individuals, couples and groups, a shot list guide, which I used to write out by hand to start with, but then it became indelibly imprinted in my head, how to relate to people doing videos, the wedding photography contract, it's important to have a contract, the business side of wedding photography, and back then in those days the who, where and how of processing and printing. Now it's all about post-production and some printing. And I talked about some current trends way back there which were just coming in, including digital and Photoshop. And the internet, what was available, was a website necessary. We've gone beyond websites now with Facebook and Instagrams and all sorts of things now, and Twitters. Recommended reading and viewing, how to get started, how to move on in your photography, and then read out and give a copy to the people who I trained, sometimes one-on-one and some in groups of up to 15, and sometimes in small groups. To become a master photographer of weddings, and this is by Rocky Gunn, who was the mentor to Gary Fong, I think it was, the famous Gary Fong, wedding photographer and inventor of things, who has got a very good, what's the word, video or vlog or post on the internet of his early life, and particularly how his early life as a photographer, and particularly how Rocky Gunn was such an inspiration to him. So this is what I had quoting from Rocky Gunn, and I took this on board. To become a master photographer of weddings, one must be an accomplished portraitist, an illustrator, a photojournalist, a director, and probably a psychologist. A wedding photographer must also be able to photograph architecture and fashion, or in short, a master wedding photographer must be accomplished in many things. That was Rocky Gunn. Another American photographer who I had a book on wedding photography by, a man called George Shaub. Some of you might be familiar with him. One of his little quotes which I picked up on: people who don't like people have no business taking people pictures, and most of all wedding photography is a people business. And then Michael Warshall is a well-known Australian wedding photographer and studio owner, and one of the doyens of Australian photography, professional photography. He said, professional photography is a business like any other. You need to plan for the future, and you need the knowledge to help you get there. That was Michael Warshall. And then one of my favourite people, who I never met personally, I believe he may have passed on now, was a Victorian Australian wedding photographer called Ian Hawthorne. And I picked up on, he used to write regular articles in photography magazines and had an amazing video series back then, which was the forerunner of all these things really that you see about photography on the internet these days. It is an article of faith to me that the really great wedding pictures are still to be made, and I think that's true, and we should always be trying to get just that amazing shot each time we go out. And this was my little preamble about my beginnings. Like many others, I got into wedding photography by accident, more than design. I was asked by relatives to photograph their weddings because they knew I was a keen photographer, and they thought that I might be able to save them some money. I did. And I managed to enter the field through this avenue on a trial and error basis at their expense, without the risks of declaring myself a professional. Looking back, the results weren't too bad, and some really quite good. But I shudder to think of what I didn't know then compared to what I know now, and of the equipment that I used to do it with. Hopefully at the very end of this very short introduction to wedding and other event type photography, you will be able to capitalise on the skills you've already learned and have been developing. In wedding photography, I have known many times, many moments of sheer delight, while at the same time losing a little sleep at times, and this was in the old days, in the film days, wondering in that period between shooting and viewing whether I really did get it right. Nowadays, of course, we have the advantage of digital cameras where we can see whether we got it right as we go, which is an amazing advantage. But there were some advantages to shooting film and making sure you got it right without the advantage of having an instant replay. So I'll just conclude at that part. These two short videos, just an introduction, and I'll get on with the rest of it on the next postings. They will be a bit intermittent, but we'll see how we go. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. You can find my main blog, Geoff Thompson's blog,